In this video, we'll learn to protect routes from unauthorized access. We'll play with the use history and use location hooks in addition to the redirect component. Let's begin. In virtually every web application or an online service, users can sign up to create their own accounts, which are then used for customizing the experience, storing private data, and allowing access to features that are reserved for registered users. In such cases, routes that serve private features need to be protected from unauthenticated access. These routes should only work if a user is authenticated, and if not, the user may be redirected to a login page. Let's revisit our project and implement route protection so that the add recipe route is only accessible to users once they're signed in. Begin by downloading and setting up the project from the link given on the screen. We are continuing from where we left off in the previous video. At this time, the add recipe route is openly accessible to everyone. Ideally, such a section should be reserved for logged in users. We have a login page which can be used to log users in easily. For the purposes of this example, I've built a custom hook known as use authentication. This hook offers a context provider function that can be used to equip a hierarchy of components with the auth context or auth CTX. We then have login and logout functions. The login function queries our API, where we have hard-coded a username and password, and if it matches, the details of that user are sent back to the hook, which stores it in a state variable named user. These login and logout functions and the user object are available to context consumer components. This way, any component can plug into this hook and get access to user data if they're logged in or a null otherwise. This is a makeshift authentication mechanism which will allow us to implement route protection in this project application. First up, we need to provide our app with access to the auth context. I'll thus go into the index.js file where we are mounting and rendering the root app component on the page. Here, I'll first import the use authentication hook. I'll then create a function component named connected app which simply uses the auth provider function component that we are exporting from our hook so that we can use it to wrap and encapsulate our app component like so. This would enable the app component and all components down the chain to access the auth context. We'll then render connected app instead of app. Once this setup is done, we'll go into the login component first. We have two controlled form components here for capturing the user's email and password, which we need to log the user in. I'll begin by bringing in the use authentication hook first. And using it, we'll extract the auth CTX or the auth context object like so. To consume the contents of this context, I'll use the use context hook, and this will conveniently allow me to access the login function, the user object, and the error data if there is one. Now, to log a user in, we just have to use an onClick function to invoke the login method, which comes from our context, and we'll pass the email and password state variables which hold the value of the input fields. Consequently, if there is an error, we'll display the alert component instance using conditional rendering. If you now type in an incorrect email ID and password, you can see the alert component instance on the page. What we want now is that once the user is logged in and the user object from the context is populated with user data, we should redirect the user to either the home route or from wherever he has come from. You see, our aim is to redirect the user from the add recipes route to the login route if he's not logged in. In such a case, we would want him to go back to the add recipe route once logged in so the user can continue with adding a recipe. Therefore, we need a programmatic way to redirect a user, and we need a way to know where he's come from if redirected, and if not, we want to redirect him to the home route. For redirecting the user, we'll need to access the browser's history stack. Therefore, we'll import the use history hook. Along with it, we'll also import the use location hook, which will get us the path from where the user has arrived on the login page if redirected. We'll then pull the browser's history instance from use history and the location object from the use location hooks. Now, if the user was redirected to the login page from another route, such as add recipe, the use location hook would give us a state object containing a from property which contains a key called path name set to the route path from where the user has arrived from. We can extract this as shown here, and if it's not present, we want to send the user to the root route or the home page. And any redirection should only happen if the user object changes from null to one which contains user data. We can thus take advantage of the use effect hook, which can be set to invoke its callback if a given dependency changes. So we'll check to see if the user is present, and if so, we'll use history.replace to redirect the user to a different route. Here we are replacing the current URL entry in the browser's history stack with the one being set using history.replace. This ensures the login route is simply replaced with the path to where the user intended to go. Or if that is not the case, then we'll land up on the home or the root route. And the use effect here depends on the user object, the value of from and the history instance. Alright, now if I go to the login page and key in my username homer@springfield.com with the password as donuts, then I'm able to log in and the router redirects me to the home route since I wasn't redirected to the login page from anywhere else. We'll now go to the app component where I'll get the use authentication hook first. We'll then extract the auth context and we'll implement use context to extract the user object and the logout function like so. Our login button menu can now be configured to display the login button only if the user object is undefined or null. I'm using a ternary expression here as you can see. If the user is logged in though, we'll display a different version of this menu where I'll add another menu item with disabled set to true so that it produces a disabled menu item to show the name of the user. This is where we'll display the name of the user from the user object. This login button will be configured to invoke the logout function, which simply resets the user object. We'll also change the icon to logout and the text of the button as well. Now let's log in. And you can now see Homer Simpson and a logout button. Clicking on logout brings back our login button again. Pretty simple once you realize the fact that we are not doing anything special here. We are just doing what we have always done in React, declarative programming. Okay, now to protect the add recipe route, which is the core subject of this entire exercise, I'm going to build a component named protected. The aim of this component is to offer a turbocharged version of the route component that will only render its child if the user is logged in or else will redirect to the login page. I'll build the protected component and we'll bring in a prop named user so that we have access to user data, that is a logged in user. We'll also bring in the children prop here, which will allow us to render a given component that is enclosed within an opening and closing instance of the protected component. We'll also use the REST operator to bring in any configuration props that you might want to set for the route component that we are going to use here. I'm going to import a route component and a component called redirect, which allows us to declaratively redirect a user to a given location. The protected component returns an instance of a route component where we'll first spread any arbitrary props that the user might want to set on this empowered instance of the route component. In simple words, any specific configuration props that you might want to set on the returned route component can be set on the protected component as well, and they'll be forwarded. Then we'll use render props here where we'll bring in the location object which the route component brings in. Now if the user is logged in, then we'll simply render the children or the enclosing component. If not, we'll use redirect to send the user to the login route, and we'll also send along a state object where the from is set to the location of the protected page. This will then allow our login component to send the user back here once the user has logged in by extracting the state object here. Alright, last step, let's import the protected component in the app.js file, and we'll simply convert the route component here, which is designed to take the users to the add recipe route, to the protected component. And we'll pass the user object as well to the user prop as declared in the protected component. Now, if I try to go to the add recipe page, you can see I get redirected to the login page immediately. But once I log in, I can access this section freely. And while on this page, if I hit logout, I'm redirected to the login page. Perfect. As you saw in this video, protecting a route is as simple as monitoring your authentication system for the presence of an authenticated user and rendering the components that represent protected areas in the app. If, however, the user is not logged in, we declaratively redirect the user to the login page. React Router offers a ton of features, and I would encourage you to read more about it and the feature set on their official website.